All right, we are in the Unit 4 review, the Great Depression, and the good news for Unit 4 is there's a lot fewer short answer questions to prepare for than there was for Unit 3. There were a lot of them, but the 1920s, a lot of stuff is going on. So let's look at question number 1, short answer number 1 that you need to prepare for, causes of the Great Depression. Now here we've got a 4 and a 4. We've got 4 that were in your book, and then we've got 4 additional causes that really should have been in your book, but your book did not include. So let's take a quick look at these. And again, for this kind of a question, it's, mainly you can almost, well, I don't want to say you bullet point it, but, just give a reason and a little bit of an explanation, a sentence, maybe 2, but probably 1 sentence. Stock market speculation. And again, speculation is good in certain circumstances. We talked about this in class. Going to college is speculation, but statistically speaking, getting a college degree on the average increases your lifetime income by well over $1 million. So it's a good return on investment to go to college. That's not as much speculation, but yet as an individual, it is speculation. But it's a good bet speculation. The stock market speculation is when that wildly goes out of control. Companies are ridiculously valued. They're not valued close to actual, and people are going to lose money when that goes down. Maldistribution of wealth. Excuse me. Allergies are fun. Now, this is one I kind of worry will be taken out of context. There's nothing wrong with the rich being rich and the poor being poor. In itself, as long as that isn't tied to external forces. You can have discrimination, be it gender, be it racial, be it religious. I mean, there's those elements. This is referring to the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer. And that economically is troublesome. And that's not politics. I get worried that this will be misconstrued. But if you get to a situation where in the Great Depression it was pretty much 90% of the population had 10% of the wealth, and 10% of the population had 90% of the wealth, that presents a problem if the 10% aren't going to buy 9 times as many shoes as they need. They're not going to be able to fill that. If 90% of the people can't afford to go into a business and buy something, that's going to hurt business after a while. So if the 10% can't offset the loss of buying from the 90%, your economy is going to go off the rails pretty quickly. The Federal Reserve actions after the Great Depression started, the Federal Reserve raised interest rates. They were trying to do that to curb speculation, particularly in the stock market. The problem is it also slowed down the economy even more. And the Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act, they raised tariffs. Why? To try and protect American factories from foreign competition and save American jobs. The problem is America was also exporting a lot of things. So when we raised our tariffs, other people raised theirs in retaliation in a trade war, and we stopped exporting, which means we lose jobs. It did save jobs, but the consensus is it was a net decrease in jobs. And then you had the 4 additional causes not in your book. Ingenious machines. We talked a lot about this in the 1920s. Workers are being made obsolete. How many people who supplied ice did the refrigerator make obsolete? Talked about driverless cars as well. Overproduction, farmers and their tractors. They're making so much of something, it drives down the price and ultimately impoverishes farmers. Farmers were so successful, they're going out of business. Too much credit is floating around. One of the reasons they raised interest rates. And there was too much credit going around. Banks were giving out loans too freely without enough to back it up, without enough securities. And then we had technological unemployment, which is heavily related to ingenious machines. And think of what we're seeing today with driverless cars. Driverless airplanes, yes, they're also being discussed as well. So there's a lot of those types of things going on at this time. Hoover's actions. Now, again, we can't blame Hoover for the Great Depression. That would be wrong historically. Hoover was president 4 months before the Great Depression started, 4 or so months. It isn't his fault. However, we can judge Hoover based on what he did. And Hoover's a bit of an enigma in how he responds. It's almost how people remember him is based on his political attacks that were made against him rather than what he actually did. Now, again, we review the laissez-faire ideals of the 1920s, the idea that government should do less, government hands off. And the past economic downturns, if you look at all the past economic downturns in American history, and you can do 1819, 1837, 1857, 1873, 1893, 1907, 1919, in all of these 7 economic downturns, they lasted about 18 months. It's kind of eerie how similar they all last in time. It happened before. We got out of it in the end. So why panic? So the idea here is kind of interesting. When the Great Depression first starts, a lot of people start looking at their watches going, this will be over. It'll flush itself out of the system. Give it 18 months. It's like a sickness. You'll just get over it. The fever will break. We're going to be healthy again. Don't sweat it. It's going to be month 19, month 20, month 32 that people are going to start looking at their watches going, is this thing broke? It was supposed to be over by now. That's when the real panic is going to set in. So what were Hoover's 3 actions? Well, remember his associationalism. We talked about this in our previous unit. This idea that Hoover's first reaction is, hey, let's get business together, let's get them working together, and let's solve this problem. We don't need a government law. We just need to get people into the room and get them talking. So let's get labor talking to factory owners. Let's get factory owners talking to the people who give them the raw materials. And let's get people to work together to collaboratively come up with an answer that doesn't require a top-down dictatorial decree from the government. So he's following his kind of principles that he followed beforehand. That doesn't work. And that's when we see Hoover shift gears. Okay, if that's not going to work, let's try something else. Now remember, Hoover's a laissez-fairist, hands off. Government does less. Hoover starts to do a few very un-Hoover-esque, un-Republican things. He actually starts to increase the size of government. Now, I got to say this. Let's not oversell it. Compared to Roosevelt, this is nothing. Compared to Coolidge and Harding, it's significant. So how do you want to judge Hoover? Do you judge him against the 2 previous presidents from his own party, or obviously Roosevelt, who's far more liberal? By Roosevelt standards, Hoover's a conservative. By Coolidge and Harding standards, Hoover's a liberal. So how should you remember him? Reconstruction Finance Corporation, a bank to businesses, not to private people. And this becomes really the largest bank in the United States. Talk about socialism. And then public works. He starts building things like what becomes Hoover Dam. It was Boulder Dam at the time. But the idea that the government's going to build things and give some jobs. So he is doing some very un-Republican things. You want to draw that out in your short answer. Hey, the Great Depression in books, movies, and songs. And this is a little bit cobbled together from different parts. This doesn't go as chronologically as some of the questions do. And, we talked about this first and causes first and Hoover's response the second. Some of this actually comes from the end of the chapter as well as towards the beginning. So you get books like the Studs Logan trilogy, the Ms. Lonely Hearts, and A Cool Million. Now again, I'm going to quickly do a synopsis. You're going to want to go into a little bit of detail on each one. But all 3 of these have something in common. They're about insanity. They're about people who had it and lost it all. It's about loss and the feeling of loneliness. Think about how people felt during the Great Depression. If they lost their jobs, even if they kept their jobs, what about their friends, their neighbors, their brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles, moms, and dads who have lost their jobs? Remember, 25% of America is unemployed. Another 25% is only partially employed. Only half of America has a full-time job. So even if you had a full-time job, you woke up every day afraid that today's the day you lose your job or lose part of it. So nobody feels good. It's what, the Great Depression isn't just an economic depression. There's a mental depression in here too. And so it shouldn't be surprising that the books of the time express that kind of depression. You get movies like Little Caesar, Public Enemy, and Duck Soup. And I played some excerpts of these from you. Duck Soup, it's a farcical comedy. It's like it has no structure. It's like things just happen. And what does happen is utterly absurd and ridiculous. That's what the Marx Brothers specialized in. Well, it really did feel like all the rules were being upended. Nothing was as it should have been. And that's the way people kind of felt. Or Little Caesar. People were, consumed by powers greater than themselves. That scene of the guy saying, "Leave my girlfriend alone," and the guy who's essentially playing the character of Al Capone is saying, "I don't think you understand. You can't get out now that you're in." And that guy can't live the good life, the married life in the suburbs or in an urban area with his wife and the kids and the white picket fence. Things outside of his control are dominating his life, just like people were dominated by the Great Depression outside of their control. And even in songs like "This Land Is My Land," that song, we played an excerpt of that song in class. That's a protest song. I mean, this land is my land. This land is your land from California. We own this land, not the 10%. It's ours. I mean, trust me, somebody who was singing this song, who had just lost their job, is looking at that song differently than somebody else. We may look at that song today. So that song is, hey, this is our land. This land was made for you and me, all of us together, not just them. The first New Deal. Now, you notice I got 3 of these highlighted in red. Here's where I don't want us to get lost in the weeds. Okay, no, I don't expect you to memorize all these New Deal programs. I listed 8. If this question is chosen, you should have at least 5. At least 5, and be able to describe them. And, we talked about how Hoover built some public works. My gosh, these are all public works. The Tennessee Valley Authority is infinitely bigger than all of Hoover's public works put together. So let's go over these, and I'm going to take these off real quick. You're going to want to look at your notes and make sure you got these, and you can at least do 5. Glass-Steagall Act creates FDIC, Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, and does not allow banks to invest in the stock market. Think of the speculation and the too much credit. So they can't do investments. That changed, by the way, in the Modernization Act of 1999-2000. Securities and Exchange Commission, a police force for Wall Street to make sure that people are reporting profits and the like as they should. The Civilian Conservation Corps, the most popular of the New Deal programs. They specialized in parks and trails. There were a number of CCC projects in Minnesota, including St. Croix State Park, one of the largest state parks in the state of Minnesota. They built shelters. They built buildings. They built buildings at, Devil's Tower, Yellowstone. And it was not only the most popular, it also, remember, was geared towards 18 to, early 20s, 24-year-old men living in urban cities. And you bring them out into the country, away from where you thought a revolution might start, pay them money, but then give them a place to live, give them food, living in barracks, give them food and give them clothing, and they actually send that money home to their parents. The Agricultural Adjustment Administration, we're going to pay farmers to not grow so much food. It decreases the supply of food, brings up the price, helps out farmers. They can now pay off their loans to banks and buy stuff at the hardware store. Soil Conservation Services, another way to try and get farmers to change how they plow so that you don't have another dust bowl. National Recovery Association, this one's by choice. It's voluntary. Hey, can you voluntarily give your workers a minimum wage? Can you voluntarily give your workers a 40-hour work week? They're asking nicely, and they're trying to make it voluntary. Associationalism, in a way. A little bit of Roosevelt associationalism. When this doesn't work in the second New Deal, you'll actually get that as a federal law. The Public Works Administration, the PWA, is like twice as big as everything that Hoover did together. And then the Tennessee Valley Authority, which mainly was in making dams in the Tennessee Valley area, still in existence today. Now, I put these 3 in red. because certainly if you were to look at this list of 8, these 3 things in red are going to have the longest long-term impact. I would know those 3 for sure. The first, New Deal, long-term. And so if this question is chosen, you need all 3. The Tennessee Valley Authority and the Securities Exchange Act and the Glass-Steagall Act. And we kind of went over these. I will say on the day of the test, you can't have questions 4 and 5 because that'd be too easy, and I'm not going to be that nice to you. So these are the 3 longest term ones, and you definitely need to know all 3 of those, and I would review those in a little bit more detail. And again, Hoover built 1 dam. Tennessee Valley Authority had 9 major dams, and eventually there'll be over 20 that are constructed. Last part we'll take care of in this first part of the video clip, critics of FDR. FDR certainly is making a lot of Republicans really angry. He is dramatically exploding the size of government. There were a number of people that thought Roosevelt wasn't going far enough, that Roosevelt should go even further down that road of big government. So you had Senator Huey Long, the Kingfish as he was known, our Share Our Wealth program. He wanted a guaranteed minimum wage per family that in today's dollars would be about $80,000 a year. The average family income in the United States is $55,000. Well, how can you pay the average family so much? He wanted to tax the heck out of the richest Americans to pay for this. This is communism in many ways. Francis Townsend later. Father Charles Conglin down here was known as the Maverick radio presence. Over 20 million listeners a week at his height. Father Charles Conglin is arguing for inflation. He's arguing for the national union, as he calls it. He wants inflationary programs that help farmers, that help people that are in debt, and obviously was not liked by big business and big banks. But he's out there arguing for these things and pushing Roosevelt to go further than he is. You've got Francis Townsend, probably one of the most influential people, single citizens of the United States. In fact, I would say he's more powerful on history than some of our presidents of the 20th century. Why? That's the guy who first makes a national argument for Social Security. Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, what he argued for now in action, is almost 50% of our federal budget. So that's going to be a significant change. But having the government take care of the elderly was a huge deal. And then we had a Communist Party. Now, one thing, the Communist Party of America was not large. It was incredibly small. But the fact that it existed scared a lot of people. And trust me, those people wanted to go much further than Long, Conglin, or Townsend. So you might remember I gave you a reading in class. On one hand, you got the American Liberty League that is telling Roosevelt, you have gone way too far. And then you've got Long, Conglin, Townsend said that you haven't gone far enough. You need to go much further. Then you got the Communist Party saying you should go even further than that. There's a lot of pressure on Roosevelt to both walk back his changes and to make them significantly bigger. And then in 1934, there was significant labor unrest. There were riots in American cities, and some people thought maybe this is the start of the communist revolution. Part of Minneapolis was out of the control of the government for 2 weeks. Is this the start of something? So there's a lot of fear coming into play here. We're going to end that here for right now and make a part 2, which will be shorter. It won't be the full 20 minutes. But again, especially on those New Deal programs, you're going to want to go back and make sure you know those fairly well.